In the humid, stagnant air of a Hong Kong training hall, amidst the smell of oil and old leather, a visiting powerhouse, 260 pounds of Western conditioning sat across from a man half her weight. She had come to prove the absolute law of physics, that mass always moves the lighter object. He had come to demonstrate a principle. 30 seconds later, the room wasn't silent because of a victory. It was silent because of the sound of splintering wood. The table between them didn't just tip. It collapsed under a pressure that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't a contest of muscle, it was an anatomy of structural failure. And the man didn't even stand up. The air inside the Kowloon training hall was not merely hot, it was heavy with expectation. It was the kind of humidity that made the mirrors lining the back wall fog slightly at the edges, blurring the reflections of the students gathered there. In the photograph that documents this event, the setting appears stark, almost utilitarian. There is no ring, no elevated platform, and no spotlight. There is only a heavy canvas punching bag hanging motionless in the right corner. A silent sentinel witnessing what was about to unfold, and the scuffed floorboards of a place devoted to sweat and repetition. The room was usually a sanctuary of movement, a place where speed was the primary currency. But on this Tuesday afternoon in 1972, movement had ceased. The students, young men in white tank tops and vintage sportswear, stood shoulder to shoulder, their bodies tense. In the background, their faces betray a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet dread. They were accustomed to seeing their teacher dismantle opponents with lightning-fast strikes, but they were not prepared for the sheer architectural density of the visitor who had walked through the doors. She was introduced only as a European grappling champion, a woman whose physique challenged the very geometry of the room. At 260 pounds, she did not move through the space so much as she displaced it. She was not a bodybuilder carved for aesthetics. She was a construct of functional, dense mass. Her arms, resting casually at her sides, appeared nearly the circumference of the smaller student's thighs. Her hair was pulled back in a practical, no-nonsense ponytail. Her face set in a look of focused, professional curiosity. She had not come to fight, not in the traditional sense. She had come to anchor herself. The challenge she brought was simple, archaic, and dangerously binary. An arm-wrestling match. It is a contest that strips away the advantages of footwork, evasion, and striking speed. It reduces combat to a single fulcrum. It is a test of leverage and static strength, an arena where the heavier object is mathematically favored to win. To the Western mind, and indeed to the laws of physics, mass is the ultimate advantage in a locked struggle. Between them sat a heavy wooden table scarred by years of utility. It was a thick, sturdy piece of furniture, likely teak or oak, designed for communal meals or study, not for the torque of two colliding human forces. The woman approached the table with the casual confidence of someone who has never found an object she could not move. She placed her right elbow on the wood. The sound was a heavy thud, like a dictionary being dropped on a desk. The students whispered among themselves. They looked at the woman's broad shoulder, then at the slender wrist of their instructor, and they did the mental calculations. They knew Bruce Lee was fast. They knew he was precise. But they also knew that if you place a boulder against a bamboo reed and apply pressure, the reed usually snaps. The atmosphere in the room shifted from curiosity to concern. This was not a movie set. There were no wires. The heavy bag in the corner remained still. The mirrors reflected the scene without distortion. The woman smiled, a small, polite gesture that said, I am the mountain, you are the wind, and today the wind will not move the stone." Bruce Lee approached the table with a terrifying lack of urgency. He had removed his shirt, revealing the anatomy that the world would later come to worship. The flared lats, the serratus muscles etched like shark gills, the veins tracing maps of efficiency across his forearms. Yet, placed beside the European champion, he looked undeniably fragile. In the grainy texture of the photograph, the size difference is not just apparent, it is absurd. The woman's biceps were thick cylinders of power, accustomed to hauling heavy loads and pinning struggling opponents to the mat. Lee's arms were wire-thin in comparison, cords of dense, dehydrated steel. If this were a betting parlor, the smart money would have been on the woman. She represented mass. Lee represented velocity. And in an arm wrestling match, velocity is useless. You cannot be fast while your elbow is glued to a table. You cannot use footwork to evade a hand that is gripping your own. Lee stepped into the pocket of space directly across from her. He did not posture. He did not slap his cheeks to wake up his nervous system. He simply placed his right elbow on the table, mirroring her position. When their hands met, the sound of skin against skin was audible in the quiet gym. Her hand nearly engulfed his. Her fingers wrapped around his thumb and knuckles with the heavy, confident grip of a mechanic handling a wrench. She adjusted her stance, widening her legs to create a base, leveraging her 260 pounds against the floor. She was building a kinetic chain, preparing to drive her shoulder weight down through her arm and smash his hand into the table. Lee did the opposite. He did not widen his stance to brace against her. He stood relatively upright. His face, captured in the profile shot, shows intense focus, but no strain. His mouth is slightly open, his eyes locked onto hers. He looked less like a man preparing for a physical contest, and more like a chess player surveying the board before the first pawn is moved. The students in the background leaned in closer, their expressions tightening. They understood the danger. This was not a movie fight where the director yells, "Cut." If the woman decided to snap his humerus, she likely could. The physics were entirely in her favor. She was the dam, he was the water pressing against it. But they forgot the primary lesson of their teacher. Water does not fight the rock, it finds the crack. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The crowd held its breath. The woman tightened her grip, her forearm muscles bunching like coiled ropes. She nodded once, signaling she was ready to end this quickly. Lee did not nod. He simply stopped moving entirely. He became a statue, waiting for the hurricane to hit. The exertion began without a verbal command. It started with a sudden, violent drop of the challenger's shoulder. She knew the mechanics of leverage intimately. Against a smaller opponent, the strategy is not to push sideways, but to drag the opponent's hand toward you, opening their bicep, and then crash your body weight down upon the compromised limb. She committed to this motion instantly. It was a surge of force designed to end the contest in under 2 seconds. It was the kind of force that breaks composure. It was the kind of force that usually results in a knuckles-to-table slam, followed by polite laughter and a handshake. But the slam never came. Instead, the room witnessed a physical anomaly. The woman's body lunged, her face flushing with the sudden output of energy, but her hand did not advance a single millimeter. It was as if she had grabbed hold of a steel bar welded directly into the concrete foundation of the building. Bruce Lee had not pushed back. Pushing back requires an antagonistic motion, a struggle that can be seen. He had simply hardened. In the photograph, The light catches the sheen of sweat beginning to break on his chest and shoulder. This was the only indicator of the internal reactor firing within him. His arm was locked at a precise angle. His latissimus dorsi flared and rigid, connecting his wrist to his hip and his hip to the floor. He had removed the arm from the equation. He was no longer arm wrestling. He was structurally integrated with the ground. The woman frowned. The confusion on her face was immediate and visible to the student standing behind her. She adjusted her grip, her knuckles turning white. She inhaled sharply and applied a second wave of pressure, this time adding a twisting motion meant to torque his wrist. The table creaked. A low, wooden groan echoed in the silence of the gym. Lee's expression did not change. He stared directly into her eyes, not with aggression, but with a terrifying neutrality. He was observing her effort as a scientist observes a reaction. The students in the mirrors behind them stopped whispering. They saw the muscles in the woman's neck cord, straining against resistance that shouldn't have existed. They saw a 260-pound champion pushing against a man half her size, and they saw that the smaller man was not trembling. The stillness was more violent than motion. It defied visual logic. The energy she was pouring into him was not dissipating. It was accumulating. The air in the room grew thick, charged with the kinetic electricity of two immovable forces locked in a zero-sum loop. She was fighting a ghost. There was nothing to push against, because he had absorbed the force entirely, routing it through his structure and into the wood beneath their elbows. Panic is a specific physiological response. It usually arrives when a person's understanding of the world is abruptly proven wrong. For the challenger, that moment arrived around the 8th second. She realized that the man opposite her was not getting tired. While her breathing had become ragged, a rhythmic huffing of exertion, Lee's breathing remained invisible. The realization stripped away her professional composure. She stopped treating this as a friendly exhibition and began treating it as a fight for survival. She planted her feet wider. She let out a guttural sound, a sharp expulsion of air that signaled maximum recruitment. She abandoned technique. She simply summoned every ounce of her mass, all 260 pounds of muscle and bone, and drove it downward through her shoulder, intending to smash Lee's arm through the surface of the table. In that fraction of a second, Lee shifted. He did not slam her hand down. That would have been a contest of strength. Instead, he made a micro-adjustment in his hips and wrist. He accepted her massive surge of downward pressure and, rather than resisting it, he fed it directly into the vertical axis of the table. He added his own internal torque to the mix, creating a catastrophic convergence of energy. The table, a sturdy veteran of the gym, became the victim of physics. It was not designed to conduct this level of kinetic argument. The force traveling down the woman's arm, met by the grounding force of Lee's structure, had nowhere to go but into the wood itself. The sound was not a snap, it was a detonation. A sharp, dry crack rang out like a pistol shot in the enclosed room. The students flinched. The mirrors seemed to vibrate. For a split second, the observers feared a bone had shattered, the humerus or the radius giving way under the strain. But the arms remained locked. It was the world beneath them that gave way. The heavy oak legs of the table sheared completely. The wood splintered violently down the center, unable to sustain the load. The tabletop collapsed, dropping the competitors forward. They fell together, hands still clasped, amidst a cloud of sawdust and the clattering of broken timber. The violence of the break was absolute. One moment there was a contest. The next there was wreckage. Gravity had finally claimed its prize, but not in the way anyone had predicted. The table lay in ruins on the gym floor, a pile of jagged wood and splinters, sacrificed to the impossible pressure generated between the giant and the dragon. The dust from the splintered wood hung in the humid air for a moment, catching the light from the high windows. Then silence, absolute, heavy silence. There was no applause. The students did not rush forward to lift their teacher on their shoulders. They stood frozen against the mirrors, their eyes wide, processing the destruction of the furniture. It is one thing to see a man break a board with a punch. It is another to see a man break a table with the force of someone else's arm. The European champion remained on her knees for a long moment. She released Lee's hand and immediately gripped her own forearm, her fingers probing the bone, searching for the fracture she felt certain must be there. She flexed her fingers. Everything worked. Her arm was intact. She looked down at the jagged remains of the oak legs, then up at Bruce Lee. Lee had already risen. He was not celebrating. He did not raise his arms in victory or look to his students for validation. He was brushing the sawdust from his trousers with a casual, rhythmic motion. His breathing had returned to an undetectable, shallow rhythm. He looked at the woman, not with the arrogance of a victor, but with the concern of a host whose furniture had just malfunctioned. He extended a hand to help her up. This was the moment the true defeat occurred. It wasn't physical. The physical contest was a draw. The table had lost. The defeat was psychological. As she took his hand and stood up, the woman's shoulders slumped. The intimidation she had carried into the room, the armor of her mass, the certainty of her physics, had evaporated. She realized that for 12 seconds she had poured everything she was into a void. She had fought a mirror and lost. Lee offered no speech. He didn't lecture her on philosophy. He simply held her gaze for a second, a look that communicated a profound truth without a single word. Force without alignment is just weight, and weight can be moved. The students saw it too. They saw the giant reduced to a student, standing amidst the wreckage of her own assumptions, while the master simply walked over to the heavy bag, gave it a single affectionate pat, and reached for his towel. The broken table was removed from the gymnasium the following morning. It was not kept as a trophy. There were no pictures taken of the wreckage to be framed on the wall. In the philosophy of the school, the debris was simply trash, evidence of a tool that had failed its purpose. It was swept up, carried out to the alleyway in Kowloon, and discarded along with the rest of the day's refuse. But among the students who witnessed the event, the image of that splintered oak burned brighter than any trophy ever could. Decades passed. The humidity of Hong Kong continued to warp the floorboards. The students grew old, becoming masters in their own right, spreading across the globe to teach the art of the intercepting fist. Yet, whenever they spoke of Bruce Lee's strength, they rarely mentioned his films. They did not speak of the speed of his kicks or the power of his 1-inch punch. They spoke of the Tuesday afternoon when the physics of the room broke before his structure did. The story became a ghost in the lineage of martial arts, a quiet legend passed down not through textbooks, but through coffee shop conversations and late-night training sessions. It became a cautionary tale about the illusion of size. The European champion, whose name has largely faded into the anonymity of history, unknowingly provided the greatest teaching tool the school ever possessed. She had walked in believing that power was something you accumulated, like money in a bank account, pounds, inches, plates on a barbell. She left understanding that true power is something you transmit. For those who were there, The lesson shifted their entire understanding of combat. They stopped looking at the size of an opponent's arms and started looking at the quality of their connection to the ground. They realized that tension is not strength. Tension is a break. The woman had lost because she was fighting herself as much as she was fighting Lee. She was a collection of tight muscles working in isolation. He was a single, unified conduit. The legacy of that 12-second encounter is not that Bruce Lee was a Superman who could snap furniture with his mind. To tell it that way would be to insult the reality of his discipline. The legacy is much more grounded, and therefore much more terrifying. It proved that the human body, when perfectly aligned and stripped of ego, can channel forces far greater than its own biological limits should allow. Today, the gym is gone, replaced by the relentless vertical growth of the city. But the silence of that moment remains. It is the silence that follows the destruction of a belief system. In the end, the event proved the ultimate thesis of his life, that the softest things in the world overcome the hardest. The water does not try to break the rock. The water simply flows, and in its refusal to be rigid, it becomes unstoppable. The table broke because it was stiff. The challenger failed because she was solid. Bruce Lee prevailed because he was neither, he was just the vessel. And when the vessel is empty, it can hold the weight of the entire world. For more interesting stories like this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you can receive updates of upcoming videos before anyone else. Thank you.